Attendant orders black woman to use the service entrance, doesn't realize she's the airline's owner. In the heart of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the world's busiest travel hub, millions of stories converge and disperse each day. Among the crowds rushing to reach distant gates and final destinations, one unassuming black woman, Alyssa Davis, stands poised by a check-in counter, elegant and calm, despite the swirl of human chaos. Unbeknownst to those around her, she is more than an ordinary passenger. In fact, she is the unspoken force behind one of the most powerful airlines in modern aviation. Today, however, a single flight attendant's smug command to use the service entrance will unleash a storm destined to remake the entire industry. Alyssa Davis's obsession with flight began long before she ever saw the inside of a plane. As a child, she lived with her mother, Monica, in a cramped but lovingly maintained apartment just east of downtown Atlanta. Their living conditions were modest, they struggled with rent, endured poor insulation during cold snaps, and spent hot summers relying on rickety fans. Despite these challenges, the warmth in that small home was real. Monica's abiding love for her daughter was a source of solace and motivation. From an early age, Alyssa discovered that reading about planes and watching them streak across the sky brought her a sense of boundless possibility. On free weekends, her mother would take her to the airport's observation deck, where Alyssa would press her face to the large glass window, wide-eyed at the giant metal birds hurtling into the air. Monica couldn't afford fancy toys or expensive vacations, but she invested in library memberships and rummage sales that offered second-hand books. Alyssa devoured every piece of information she could find on aircraft design, aerodynamics, and eventually, the business side of aviation itself. School became Alyssa's proving ground. Although her local public school was chronically underfunded, she excelled with voracious academic curiosity. Teachers soon recognized her hunger to learn. One evening, as she carefully did her homework by the flickering light of a bedside lamp, she happened upon an article about strong black women who had defied societal norms in various industries. It lit a fire in her heart. If others could break barriers, she could too. No sense of inadequacy or financial limitation would hinder her from realizing an ambition that seemed outlandish one day, owning an airline. That dream was years in the making, but the seeds were firmly planted. In high school, Alyssa's teachers encouraged her to join a local robotics club, where she honed her aptitude for building machines and understanding mechanical structures. She realized that her fascination with airplanes went deeper than the engineering side alone. She also grew curious about the economics and logistics behind how airlines ran. This holistic fascination set her apart from her peers, who either leaned toward hands-on mechanics or pure business. Alyssa pursued both, determined to understand every facet of the aviation ecosystem. Her mother, Monica, remained a steadfast supporter, despite never quite grasping the full scope of her daughter's ambitions. To Monica, what mattered was that Alyssa was chasing a dream, an escape from the poverty and uncertainty they had known. Each time, Monica finished a double shift at the diner and came home with sore feet. Alyssa would massage her ankles and vow that one day their situation would change. That vow propelled Alyssa through advanced placement classes, through local and state-level science fairs, and eventually to the doorstep of a top-tier university. She won a patchwork of scholarships, some for academic excellence, others for her leadership in community outreach programs. The summer before college, she was accepted into a specialized internship run by a local branch of an aerospace manufacturer. The taste of professional life in the aviation sector electrified her. She spent hours drafting proposals for more efficient flight routes, albeit as personal projects that she dared not share yet. She was just an intern after all. Then came her acceptance letter to Georgia Tech. It was a dream scenario, a premier engineering school close to home. Alyssa chose to major in aeronautical engineering and minor in business administration. She knew she needed both the technical acumen and the business savvy. Across her undergraduate years, she often recounted her dream to close friends. "I'll build a firm that consults for airlines, and eventually, with the right capital, I'll own one." Most people nodded politely, indulgently. Few actually believed her, but Alyssa's confidence never wavered. Her college success led her to an even more prestigious graduate fellowship, wherein she specialized in airline fleet management. By the time she'd finished, she was courted by multiple major aerospace and airline firms across the country. Yet her heart remained in Atlanta, close to the airport she'd grown up admiring. So she returned, forging her own path. By age 28, she'd launched a small consultancy focusing on optimizing airline routes and crew scheduling. By 30, she secured her first major contract with a regional carrier desperately needing a revamp. Her solution saved that carrier millions within the first year, garnering the attention of top airline executives and investors. Money followed, as did the opportunity to expand. In her early 30s, she orchestrated a partnership with venture capitalists interested in a fundamental shake-up of the aviation business model. Alyssa's quiet rise to influence was overshadowed only by her relentless work ethic. She maintained a low profile, letting her results and restructured contracts speak louder than public accolades. Eventually, she found herself in a position to acquire controlling shares in a niche airline that operated under the broader Delta Airlines umbrella. It was a masterstroke of timing and negotiation. The airline needed fresh capital and rebranding. Alyssa stepped in, retooled the operation, and within 3 years, the once flailing carrier turned profitable. She did all of this with little fanfare, preferring to remain behind the scenes. Yet for all her professional success, Alyssa never forgot her roots. She visited her mother regularly, ensuring Monica no longer had to work punishing shifts. She also funded scholarships for underprivileged youth with STEM aspirations, remembering how crucial even small opportunities had been in shaping her life. Through it all, she remained humble, and the public at large remained largely unaware of her identity or her significant stake in one of the world's leading airlines. She wasn't simply a well-to-do consultant or an executive, she was, in essence, an owner, and that ownership, kept understated, would set the stage for a future confrontation she never anticipated. On a brisk Wednesday, Alyssa arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with the aim of catching a flight to New York. She had back-to-back commitments, a keynote at a major aviation conference, a philanthropic luncheon promoting STEM education, and private meetings with corporate partners. Despite her busy schedule, she chose to fly commercially in first class instead of taking a private jet. This was partly because she liked to see how her airline treated everyday travelers, gathering unfiltered insights to refine strategies that might not be captured in glossy reports. The airport bustled in the early morning rush. Families lugged bulky suitcases, business travelers peered into their phones, and bleary-eyed red-eye passengers scurried for connecting flights. The hallmark humming of point-pay announcements droned overhead, guiding travelers to gates and terminals in crisp monotones. Alyssa weaved her way through the crowd, traveling light with a single carry-on. She dressed simply in a fitted grey pantsuit with a tasteful silk blouse. Her hair was styled in neat twists. She wore minimal jewelry, just stud earrings, and a thin silver watch. Nothing about her screamed airline owner, and that's how she preferred it. As she neared the first-class check-in counter, she saw a short line of passengers waiting for assistance. The counter area was dominated by a digital board displaying flight schedules, occasionally interrupted by the beep of scanning tickets. Alyssa paused, checking her phone for messages from her assistant, Simone, when a commotion near the desk grabbed her attention. A flight attendant in a crisp uniform stood behind the counter, addressing a confused couple who spoke in halting English. The name tag on the flight attendant's blouse read Kimberly. Alyssa watched, concerned, as Kimberly let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes while explaining luggage weight restrictions. Instead of patiently guiding the couple, she turned irritable and dismissive. Alyssa sensed the tension building. When it was Alyssa's turn, she approached the counter politely. Kimberly, still flushed from her previous interaction, barely glanced at her. "Yes?" she said in a clipped tone. "Where are you flying to?" Alyssa handed over her confirmation email. "I'm on flight 1627 to New York, traveling in first class." Kimberly typed for a moment, eyes flicking from Alyssa's attire to her booking details with suspicion. "Flight is almost full. Are you sure this is the right ticket?" "Yes, quite sure." Alyssa kept her voice calm. Kimberly frowned at the screen, then at Alyssa, her eyes narrowed. "You're in first class. But you don't have any checked bags?" Alyssa shrugged politely. "I travel light." Kimberly's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Well, we often get employees or standby passengers trying to board first class without proper authorization. If you're an employee, you should use the service entrance. You can't just stroll into the passenger queue." Alyssa's eyebrows rose. She sensed the racial undertone in Kimberly's assumption that a black woman in professional attire must be staff, or some standby traveler, rather than a paying first-class passenger. She could almost feel the stares of other travelers behind her. "I'm not an employee traveling standby," Alyssa replied, carefully controlling her frustration. "This is my full fare ticket." Kimberly sighed loudly as if inconvenienced. "Look, the service entrance is down that hallway." She pointed toward an inconspicuous door near the side of the counter. "We can't have people holding up the line here." Heat flared in Alyssa's chest. This was more than a simple misunderstanding. But she also didn't want to create a scene. She quietly but firmly insisted, "I'm not going to the service entrance. I have the right to check in here, just like any other first-class passenger." Kimberly's lips curled in a mocking half-smile. "You can speak to a supervisor if you like, but I'm telling you, you should really step aside and let paying passengers through." A hush settled over the immediate area, some onlookers gawking in disbelief. A few were about to say something in Alyssa's defense, but she calmly nodded and stepped away from the counter. She could have unleashed her authority then and there, exposing who she was, but she chose restraint. Public meltdowns rarely ended well, and it was better to gather more evidence of Kimberly's bigotry before acting. She headed to the customer service desk, located a few counters away. Inside, frustration roiled her mind. "Is this how my airline is representing itself to everyday people?" she wondered. She vowed that by the end of this ordeal, Kimberly's behavior would be addressed at the highest levels. At the customer service station, Alyssa joined a short line. While she waited, she overheard an elderly passenger describe issues about a missing wheelchair request. The staff at customer service responded compassionately, offering immediate help. Alyssa found the difference between that staff member's kindness and Kimberly's hostile demeanor stark. When her turn came, the representative, a man named Douglas, greeted her politely. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help? I'm traveling on flight 1627 to New York in first class," Alyssa said, handing over her confirmation. "I just had a very unpleasant experience at the check-in counter. The flight attendant there seems to believe my ticket is invalid, telling me to use the service entrance." Douglas's face fell, perplexed. He scanned her ticket and frowned at the computer screen. "Your seat in first class is indeed confirmed, Miss Davis. I'm truly sorry you were treated that way. That is definitely not how we expect our staff to behave. Can you issue my boarding pass?" she asked. Douglas nodded. "Absolutely. Since you're in first class, you're also entitled to use our premium lounge if you'd like. He clicked through a few screens, printed out the pass, and slid it toward her. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience. If you have a moment, I can file a formal complaint about the attendant who refused to check you in properly. Alyssa was impressed by Douglas's professionalism. She provided him with the details of her encounter, including the flight attendant's name and the remarks made. Douglas jotted everything down meticulously. Once finished, he promised to escalate the complaint. "That's helpful," Alyssa replied, taking her boarding pass. "I appreciate it." She made her way to security, carefully tucking the pass into her sleek laptop bag. The anger still simmered beneath her calm exterior, but she had faith that the system would address this. Or at least, she would ensure the system did not brush it under the rug. Having faced subtle discrimination many times, she had learned to be strategic in her responses. Exploding in the heat of the moment sometimes let the perpetrators off the hook, while painting the victim as emotional or disruptive. Instead, she would channel her fury into purposeful action. The long line at the TSA checkpoint moved steadily. Alyssa cleared the security scan without issue, then followed the corridor that led to Terminal B. Along the way, she stopped at a newsstand to purchase a magazine featuring an article about sustainable aviation, her passion project. It felt odd reading about innovative new engines and eco-friendly breakthroughs in the context of the personal conflict raging in her mind. When she finally reached Gate B17, she saw the overhead sign reading Flight 1627 to New York on time. A throng of passengers waited in lounge seats, some munching on snacks, others tapping on phones or reading newspapers. She eyed the gate agents, wondering if Kimberly was among them. Instead, she spotted a tall male flight attendant, Jared, and another woman in uniform. No sign of Kimberly. Just as she sat down, her phone buzzed. A text from Simone, "Hope you're on schedule. Remember the investor meet is tomorrow at 9 a.m. and your keynote is 3 p.m. today. Break a leg." Alyssa typed back a quick thanks. She took a measured breath and tried to mentally prepare for the day's events, a day that had begun with confrontation but might still hold promise. Boarding was called in sections, starting with families traveling with young children and passengers needing extra assistance. Then came first class. Alyssa joined the short line, scanning her pass. The gate agent smiled warmly. No issues there. She stepped through the jet bridge and into the plush first-class cabin. Rows of wide seats lined each side of the aisle, offering more legroom and personal space. Flight attendants greeted each passenger, offering to stow bags or provide pre-departure beverages. She found her seat, 2A, near a window. Placing her carry-on in the overhead bin, she settled into the cool leather seat and exhaled, letting the gentle hum of the air conditioning calm her nerves. Within minutes, the cabin filled up with executives, occasional holiday travelers, and a couple who looked like newlyweds. Then she heard the voice, sharp, overly loud in the hushed cabin. Kimberly. The flight attendant who dismissed her earlier. Alyssa turned her head slightly, noticing Kimberly conferring with the other attendants at the front galley. The new flight attendant, Jared, seemed to be listening with a mildly concerned expression. Kimberly's face appeared tight with annoyance, as though everything about her day was an inconvenience. Alyssa turned her attention back to her phone, preferring not to engage, but she felt a twinge of dread. Could this woman cause further trouble during the flight? She tapped out a short message to Simone about the fiasco, adding, "I'm on the plane, but the same flight attendant is here." Right on cue, Kimberly walked down the aisle, distributing newspapers and a warm greeting to each first-class passenger. When she reached Alyssa, her gaze flicked to the seat number on her passenger manifest. She froze for half a second, recognition dawning. An almost imperceptible sneer crossed her lips. "Ma'am," she said curtly, holding out a folded newspaper, "would you like something to read?" Alyssa looked up. "Thank you, I'm fine." Kimberly lingered, as if wanting to say something more, but she simply pursed her lips and moved on. Moments later, Jared passed by, offering pre-departure drinks. He seemed more pleasant, asking Alyssa if she wanted juice or champagne. She requested water. As the plane began its pushback, safety announcements played. Alyssa tried to lose herself in a novel on her e-reader, yet her mind returned to the morning's confrontation, replaying Kimberly's condescension at the counter. She had quietly escalated it to customer service, but was that enough? Part of her considered sending a direct message to the top corporate brass. But then the plane taxied, the engines roared, and soon they were ascending into the cottony clouds of a Georgia sky. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, Alyssa reclined slightly, hoping for a smooth flight. However, turbulence of another kind began to brew. Over the next hour, she overheard Kimberly gossiping at the galley with another flight attendant. "Some people think they're so special," Kimberly muttered, not so subtly, always playing victim. "If they can't afford first class, they should just say so, not waste our time." Alyssa tensed. She wondered if Kimberly realized she was the victim in question, or if the woman simply didn't care about being overheard. The older couple across the aisle looked uneasy. Others seemed to sense the tension, but no one intervened yet. Alyssa breathed deeply, counting to 10. She refused to be provoked into a mid-air argument. The airplane was no place for theatrics. Later, lunch service commenced. Jared offered Alyssa a salmon entree, served with a small side salad. She thanked him quietly. Meanwhile, Kimberly served drinks but seemed to avoid Alyssa's row until last. When she finally arrived, she placed a glass of ginger ale on Alyssa's tray with a barely concealed scowl. Not a word was exchanged. After lunch, Alyssa tried to focus on some notes for her keynote speech. She was set to discuss sustainability in aviation, how the industry could innovate in areas like alternative fuels, more aerodynamic planes, and socially responsible corporate culture. The irony of championing social responsibility while dealing with bigotry from her own employee did not escape her. She decided to document everything: the conversation at the check-in, the remarks on board, the smirks and sneers. If a thorough investigation was needed, she'd have plenty of details to share. When Flight 1627 finally descended toward John F. Kennedy International Airport, a bright midday sun greeted them, reflecting off glass terminal buildings. Passengers and crew braced for landing, and the wheels kissed the runway with a gentle thump. As the aircraft taxied, Alyssa could already see messages flooding her phone from Simone, reminding her of her next commitments in the city. She steeled herself. The moment the plane parked, she'd confront the situation systematically. In the final moments before deplaning, Kimberly stood at the front of first class, instructing people to exit row by row. As Alyssa approached, carry-on in hand, Kimberly's false smile returned. "Thank you for flying with us, Miss Davis." The subtext was unmistakable. "I know who you are, but I'm still going to act like you don't belong." Alyssa nodded tersely and left the aircraft. Inside the jet bridge, she noticed Jared approach hurriedly. "Miss Davis," he called softly, "I just wanted you to know. I saw how she treated you. If you need a witness statement, I'm willing. She's been unprofessional to more than a few passengers. I've filed complaints, but nothing sticks." Alyssa offered a grateful smile. "Thank you, Jared. I appreciate it. You may hear from someone in management soon." He nodded and left. Alyssa continued into the terminal, the typical swirl of chaos greeting her travelers, rushing to catch connecting flights, families reuniting at baggage claim, and employees escorting VIP passengers to private lounges. She carved out a quiet corner near a row of gates and pulled out her phone, placing a call to an internal contact in the airline's HR department. It went to voicemail. She left a succinct message: "Please call me back about a serious staff misconduct issue. Urgent." With that done, she navigated to ground transportation, where a private car was waiting. The driver, a tall man in a navy suit, took her bag and opened the door. She slid into the back seat, exhaling the tension of the flight. As they pulled away from the curb, she stared out at the passing highways. Every so often, a plane roared overhead, a reminder that while she had soared high in her career, she was still wrestling with the most basic forms of prejudice. Moments later, her phone rang. It was Simone. "Alyssa, are you okay? Douglas from customer service in Atlanta emailed me about the incident. He said it was blatant discrimination." Alyssa sighed. "I'm fine, just furious. Kimberly is doubling down on her rudeness. I need this handled swiftly. Let's schedule a meeting with the management team. I'll bring them up to speed on everything. Also, keep an eye on any social media mentions. I have a feeling something might have been recorded." Simone's tone grew serious. "I'll monitor. Any next steps you want me to set into motion?" "Yes," Alyssa said. "I want that flight attendant suspended pending an investigation. This is no longer a minor inconvenience." A pause. "Understood," Simone replied. "Don't forget you have to speak at the conference tomorrow afternoon. Try not to let this overshadow your preparation." "I know, but ironically this might tie directly into my message about corporate responsibility. Let's focus on the plan for now." They wrapped up the call, and Alyssa tried to shift her mind to the upcoming keynote. She rubbed her temples, imagining how the next 48 hours might unfold. She had no idea, however, just how massive the fallout would become and how it would ricochet across social media, boardrooms, and the entire airline industry. Alyssa woke before dawn to an incessant cacophony of pings and vibrations from her phone. At first, she assumed it was just her usual wave of email alerts, morning reminders from Simone, flight status, updates, perhaps a note or two from colleagues on the East Coast. Yet the sheer volume of notifications soon made it clear something more serious was unfolding. Her suspicions were confirmed the moment she checked her text messages. Simone had written 6 times within the past hour. 1. "Have you been online? A video is going viral." 2. "Wake up ASAP, this is huge." 3. "CNN has reached out, this is out of control." Alarm bells rang in Alyssa's mind as she opened social media to see what all the fuss was about. It didn't take long to find it. An unsteady 30-second cell phone clip capturing Kimberly's confrontation at the airport check-in counter. The video showed Kimberly, eyes narrowed and voice dripping with condescension, telling Alyssa that she should use the service entrance and didn't belong in first class. Someone had evidently recorded it from behind the stanchions, capturing enough context to make the prejudice unmistakable. Within hours of posting, the clip had amassed thousands upon thousands of retweets. The hashtag airline discrimination soared into the top trends. Heated comments flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, many condemning the airline for allowing such blatant bias to go unchallenged. Others recognized Alyssa as a major stakeholder in the airline, further deepening the scandal, so even the owner isn't safe from racist treatment at her own company. Alyssa's phone blared once more, this time a call from Simone. She answered in a hushed tone, adrenaline surging. "What's the latest?" "I've been up all night," Simone replied, her voice strained. "Media outlets from local stations to national networks are picking up the story. BuzzFeed just posted an article about the flight attendant from hell. CNN wants you on air for an interview. Everyone is clamoring for an official statement." Alyssa rubbed her temples, trying to stave off an oncoming headache. Though she had anticipated that someone might have recorded the humiliating exchange, she never predicted it would erupt to this scale. Still, part of her recognized the power of public outrage. Maybe now, the airline would have no choice but to fully reckon with its internal flaws. "Tell them I need time to prepare my statement," she told Simone. "I'm not dodging them, but I'm not rushing into a half-baked interview." Have the PR team get me the official line we're issuing. Then I'll decide how to integrate it with my own experience. Got it, Simone replied, pausing. Alyssa, there's more. Apparently multiple passengers from Flight 1627 are coming forward with similar stories about Kimberly being rude or biased. Some even said they tried to complain before but felt ignored. Alyssa's jaw tightened. The scope of the scandal widened with each new revelation. If passengers had already lodged complaints, why hadn't the airline responded? Was there a breakdown in how HR processed such reports? This was bigger than one flight attendant's behavior. It signaled systemic blind spots or even indifference. Just then, a call from Gregory Marshall, the CEO, interrupted their conversation. Alyssa quickly switched lines. Alyssa, Gregory said, voice tense, the board is in an uproar. We have an emergency video conference in 3 hours. We can't let this fester. If we don't move decisively, the stock might nosedive. She understood the gravity of his tone. In an industry built on service and public trust, a viral scandal suggesting racism could be disastrous. Investors feared lawsuits and brand damage. Employees feared a culture that condoned such behavior. Schedule it, Alyssa said, her voice colder than she intended. And tell the board I won't shy away from the reality of what happened. This can't be swept under the rug. Hanging up, she stared at her phone's notifications, her feed flooded with strangers, both furious and sympathetic. A wave of conflicting emotions coursed through her, anger, humiliation, but also a fierce resolve. When she had first encountered Kimberly's contempt, she hoped filing a complaint would suffice. Now the story was national news, forcing the entire airline to confront a crisis that had been festering beneath polished corporate veneers. She took a moment to steady herself, gazing around the minimalist hotel suite that suddenly felt too small for the chaos swirling outside. If the airline wanted a scapegoat, they would be sorely mistaken. She intended to leverage this moment to ensure lasting reform, no matter how messy it got in the public arena. Her phone buzzed yet again, likely another journalist inquiry. Gritting her teeth, she swiped to answer, stepping willingly into the storm that had already begun tearing through the industry. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a high-rise conference room in Midtown Manhattan, illuminating a tense assembly of the airline's top brass. CEOs, CFOs, shareholders, and legal counsel all wore the same strained expression, the usual corporate confidence tempered by a sudden and very public crisis. The long, polished table was littered with laptops and stacks of documents, evidence of last-minute scrambling to manage the uproar triggered by the viral check-in-counter video. At one end of the table, Gregory Marshall, the airline's CEO, stood with arms folded. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his fatigue. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," he began, voice echoing in the hushed room. "We have a significant problem on our hands, and we can't afford to make any missteps." Alyssa Davis sat to his right, face calm but posture rigid. She had quietly arrived a few minutes earlier, acknowledging only a handful of people with nods. Though she'd typically keep a lower profile, every gaze seemed to land on her. After all, she was both the victim of the widely condemned encounter and a major player in the airline's corporate hierarchy. The tension in the room felt palpable, as though the slightest spark could ignite an explosion of frustration, blame, and panic. Gregory cleared his throat. "We're all aware of the viral footage depicting flight attendant Kimberly directing Miss Davis, one of our major stakeholders, I might add, to use the service entrance. As of this morning, the airline's social media channels have been flooded with condemnation. The hashtags #airline discrimination and #racial bias are among the top US trends." Shareholders are calling me non-stop. Some of our most loyal corporate clients are threatening to reconsider their partnerships. Brianna Yu, the CFO, interjected. And let's not forget our stock. As of an hour ago, it's dipped nearly 7%. That might not sound catastrophic, but if this scandal continues, we could be looking at double digits. She pushed her wire-rimmed glasses higher on her nose. Investors are demanding immediate reassurance that this is being taken seriously. On a video screen at the opposite end of the room, Harold Summers, an older board member who had dialed in remotely, wore his wariness plainly. "We need to remain cautious," he said, voice crackling through the speaker. "Yes, the footage looks terrible, but we must follow proper investigative procedures. Suspension and termination without due process could backfire." Alyssa finally spoke, her tone clipped. "Harold, we're well past the point of simply worrying about corporate liability. The public is outraged for good reason. People of color and, frankly, any decent traveler have grown tired of such behavior being swept under the rug. We have an obligation not just to shareholders, but to every single passenger and employee who believes in fair treatment." Silence descended, thick as fog. For years, Alyssa's role in the airline had been partially veiled, but now her authority and personal stake in the matter put her words on par with the CEO's. Gregory nodded solemnly. "I agree. We can't appear indecisive. The disciplinary action has to be swift and unequivocal." The airline's lead attorney, a poised woman named Rhonda, opened a folder thick with papers. "Legally, we have sufficient grounds to suspend Kimberly immediately. Multiple passengers alongside Miss Davis have lodged formal complaints, and the video evidence supports claims of discriminatory conduct." She flipped a page, scanning notes. However, if the airline moves straight to termination, Kimberly's counsel might argue that we deprived her of a fair inquiry. "A short but thorough investigation is our best course." A murmur of agreement washed around the table. Harold exhaled and nodded reluctantly. "All right, but it needs to be done promptly. We can't drag this out while social media runs wild." Gregory turned toward Alyssa. "You fielded several media requests. CNN, MSNBC, even Good Morning America are asking for interviews. What's your position on speaking publicly?" All eyes shifted to Alyssa again, some expectant, others wary. She inhaled, recalling the onslaught of calls and messages she had received all morning. "I'll talk, but I won't minimize what happened to me or to any passenger who's experienced this flight attendant's hostility. Transparency is key to regaining public trust. If they think we're covering anything up, it'll only feed the flames." Brianna nodded. "And we can emphasize that we have strict codes of conduct and are launching a comprehensive review. Maybe we can also highlight any training improvements or programs we had in the works show. We're not just reacting, but proactively making the airline more inclusive." Alyssa's gaze lingered on Brianna. She appreciated the mention of deeper reforms. "Right. We can't simply blame one person, suspend her, and wash our hands of responsibility. This entire situation reveals deeper cracks, complaints about staff rudeness, potential gaps in HR procedures. If the system had caught Kimberly's behavior sooner, maybe this wouldn't have escalated to a national scandal." Gregory pinned an official memo to the digital board in the center of the table. "I've drafted a preliminary action plan. Step 1, an immediate public statement acknowledging the incident and our zero-tolerance stance on discrimination. Step 2, suspend Kimberly, pending an expedited investigation. Step 3, restructure our training programs, including implicit bias training for all staff, from check-in to senior managers." He cleared his throat and added, "Step 4, a thorough audit of prior complaints that may have slipped through the cracks." Harold rubbed the bridge of his nose. That's an ambitious program. Can we handle the cost and logistical headache right now? Alyssa leaned forward. Considering the potential fallout if we don't, the question should be, can we afford not to? She spoke with a calm intensity that brooked no dispute. Over the years, she had become adept at navigating high-stakes boardrooms. But this felt different. This was personal, an affront to her dignity, and a betrayal of the values she believed her airline should stand for. The lead attorney flipped another page. We also need to prepare for any legal pushback from Kimberly's side. She might claim this is an overreaction fueled by public hysteria. Alyssa shrugged. Let her. The video speaks for itself. Plus, multiple witnesses have stepped forward. Even if this tries to morph into a "hey said," she said, I have every intention of testifying, not just as a passenger, but as someone invested in preventing such behavior altogether. A scattered chorus of murmurs indicated agreement. Harold remained stoic, but he raised no further objections. Clearly, the entire board recognized that the usual corporate tap dance, evasive answers, and boilerplate apologies wouldn't suffice in the age of instantaneous, global scrutiny. Gregory tapped his notepad, wrapping up. All right, I think we have a consensus on our strategy. Alyssa, I'd like you to collaborate closely with PR to finalize the statement. We'll push it out within the hour. Then we'll move to suspend Kimberly formally and launch the internal audit. A quiet relief swept around the table, although the underlying tension lingered. The airline was at the brink of a PR meltdown, but at least they had a unified plan, one that balanced legal caution with the moral imperative for swift, visible accountability. Before anyone could leave, Alyssa raised a hand. One last thing, after this crisis is managed, let's not forget the bigger picture. Incidents like these are often symptoms of deeper cultural issues. We must address the root causes like weak oversight of staff conduct, fear of reporting among junior employees, and a lack of diversity in senior leadership. If we limit ourselves to punishing one person and smoothing over the headlines, we'll have learned nothing. Her words hung in the air, echoing across tense silence. Slowly, heads nodded around the room, acknowledging that the price of real reform would be high, but the price of ignoring it could be higher still. And with that final caution, the meeting adjourned. No one left the conference room feeling triumphant or relieved. Instead, they departed with renewed urgency. They had set a course, but every minute counted. Outside those glass walls, the world was watching, and the board now understood that if they wanted to soar again, they had to confront this crisis openly, honestly, and with more backbone than any simple press release could provide. That afternoon, Alyssa arrived at a midtown Manhattan broadcast studio, where a CNN news crew awaited her for a live segment. The bright lights, bustling crew, and whir of cameras were familiar. She'd done interviews before, but usually about sustainability or tech innovation, not about a scandal within her own airline. A producer greeted her, walking her to a small chair in front of a backdrop. She was outfitted with a discreet earpiece. Within minutes, the anchor's voice crackled, introducing the piece. Today, the airline industry faces a major controversy as a viral video shows a flight attendant discriminating against a black first-class passenger. Even more surprising, that passenger is a major stakeholder in the airline itself. Joining us now is Alyssa Davis, whose story has sparked intense public debate. Alyssa's heart thumped. She forced herself to remain calm, to project measured resolve rather than indignation. The anchor's questions began. Miss Davis, can you walk us through what happened at the check encounter? Alyssa recounted the incident, choosing her words carefully to underscore that this was not about personal revenge, but an example of a systemic issue. The anchor then pivoted. Do you believe this flight attendant targeted you because of your race? Yes, Yes, Alyssa replied matter-of-factly, because the remarks made were consistent with the stereotype that a black woman in first class must be there by mistake or as an employee, rather than a paying passenger. This is exactly the kind of bias we need to root out. Has the airline taken any action? Yes, she's been suspended. We're also launching a comprehensive review of our training and complaint handling processes. I'm pushing for meaningful reforms so no passenger endures such treatment. The anchor pressed on. There are critics who say you're using this incident to shine a spotlight on yourself or to push your personal agenda. How do you respond? Alyssa inhaled, controlling the flash of irritation that question sparked. I didn't ask for this attention, and I certainly didn't want to be humiliated at my own airline's check-in counter. But it happened. If shining a spotlight can bring about positive change and highlight the need for respectful service, then I embrace that. This isn't about me. It's about every traveler who's ever felt diminished by prejudice. The interview wrapped with a final question about the airline's future. Alyssa emphasized the necessity for a culture shift, bridging it to her overall vision of an airline that truly serves all communities. When the camera's red light clicked off, she exhaled. The producer gave her a nod of approval, remarking, "That was riveting. We expect strong viewer response." She left the studio, phone already buzzing with messages. Simone texted, "Social media is blowing up. Tons of support. Some trolls. Keep strong." As she headed back to her hotel to prepare for the next interview, a local New York station, she thought about the avalanche of attention. She never wanted to be a public figure for battling discrimination, but she couldn't ignore the platform fate had given her. In the swirl of these interviews, she found a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps this was her chance to do more than own an airline. She could transform it from the inside out. Meanwhile, Kimberly's life spiraled. An official suspension notice hit her inbox, accompanied by a mandate not to interact with airline customers while the investigation proceeded. Her supervisor, Cheryl Cook, had tried to conduct a preliminary interview, but Kimberly insisted she did nothing wrong. "I was just following procedure," she maintained. But social media was relentless. Within hours, photos of Kimberly circulated, showing her at the check-in desk, sometimes mid-sneer, as captured by passengers' smartphone snapshots. The damning video played repeatedly on news segments discussing racial bias in public service. Online sleuths dug into any available information, discovering prior complaints from different flights, blog posts mentioning a rude flight attendant named Kim, and more. Feeling cornered, Kimberly tried to lash out legally. She consulted a lawyer, claiming defamation and emotional distress. The lawyer, however, reviewed the publicly available footage and quietly suggested settling or apologizing. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Her on-record statements about people like you weighed heavily against her, especially with other passengers attesting to similar experiences. A rumor spread that even if the airline decided to show leniency, no competitor would want to hire a flight attendant who had triggered a racially charged national scandal. Her career in aviation might be over. She told friends in frantic phone calls that she was being scapegoated. Most advised her to apologize publicly. "They might spare you," one friend said. But pride got the better of Kimberly. She posted a short statement online, denying any prejudice and accusing Alyssa of pulling rank. It only inflamed the outcry. By the time corporate finished their investigation, within a matter of days, they'd gathered enough complaints to justify termination. Kimberly was fired, effective immediately. Hard karma had found her, catalyzed by her own misdeeds. In the aftermath, she faced countless social media messages, some supportive, many hostile. The airline offered her no severance beyond the bare minimum. Her attempts to pivot to other airlines failed. The scandal was still fresh. Ultimately, she vanished from the public stage, a cautionary tale of how arrogance and racism could destroy a career overnight. For Alyssa, the days and weeks following the interviews were a haze of meetings, press briefings, and strategic planning. The airline had taken a financial hit, stock price wavered, and some frequent flyers expressed concerns about the corporate culture. But there was also an outpouring of support from people applauding the airline's quick action and Alyssa's transparent handling. Gregory Marshall convened a summit of executives to discuss reforms. They greenlit enhanced staff training that tackled unconscious bias, revised the complaint escalation process, and enforced real accountability when staff engaged in inappropriate conduct. Alyssa insisted on personally overseeing the development of these programs, ensuring they weren't mere box-checking exercises. She drew on her background in data analysis to measure the success of each initiative, planning anonymous surveys and tracking complaint resolution times. Within a month, the airline launched an inclusivity initiative, publicizing a set of comprehensive changes. It included mentorship programs for minority employees, mandatory sensitivity workshops for all staff, including senior leadership, and new partnerships with community advocacy groups. A marketing campaign highlighted these efforts, with the tagline "Flying Forward Together" featuring a diverse array of employees and passengers in the commercials. Some cynics on social media deemed it an elaborate PR stunt, but many recognized the genuine strides being made under Alyssa's watch. During this period, Alyssa also strengthened ties with civil rights organizations. She collaborated with them to establish scholarships for underprivileged high school students eyeing aviation careers. At a televised press conference unveiling these programs, Alyssa emphasized, "This isn't about clearing our name, it's about redefining the future of air travel as welcoming, equitable, and uplifting for everyone." The CEO, CFO, and board members stood behind her, offering their visible support. They all recognized that the best path to salvage brand reputation lay in real, transparent action. Late one evening, Alyssa found herself alone in her Atlanta office. High above the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the airport lights twinkling in the distance, where planes landed and took off against the starry sky. She thought back to her childhood, standing on the airport's observation deck, dreaming of being part of that grand ballet of aircraft. How far she had come, no longer the starry-eyed kid outside the glass, but an industry shaper with the power to demand accountability. A gentle knock sounded on her door. Simone walked in, carrying a small stack of papers. "These are the preliminary satisfaction surveys from employees regarding the new inclusivity training," she said, handing them over. Early numbers looked promising. Alyssa skimmed the data. While some employees grumbled about woke corporate culture, a larger portion expressed relief that the airline was taking discrimination seriously. Many employees of color had written comments praising the initiative. Finally, one read, "I feel comfortable speaking up." Another said, "This training should have been mandatory years ago." Emotion welled in Alyssa's chest. "Thank you, Simone. This means a lot." Her assistant nodded. "You did good, Alyssa, turning a personal ordeal into something bigger. Do you ever regret that it went so public?" Alyssa set the papers aside, gazing out at the runway lights. "Part of me wished it never happened, that no one ever had to suffer such indignity. But sometimes public outrage is the lever we need to force deep change. People pay attention when they see injustice so plainly." Simone smiled softly. "Your keynote speech last week on sustainability and social responsibility was a hit, by the way. Everyone praised you for tying together environmental progress with ethical imperatives. They said it felt real." Alyssa looked at her reflection in the window, seeing a woman shaped by trials, perseverance, and a relentless desire to do better. "Because it is real," she murmured. We can't separate how we treat the planet from how we treat each other. Both define the future of flight. She realized that in the swirl of crisis management, she had inadvertently become the face of a more profound movement, one linking corporate accountability with human dignity in the aviation sphere. Her position gave her the means to direct resources, shift policies, and cultivate a culture that could set an example for other airlines. She resolved not to squander that chance. Several months later, the results of the airline's transformation were increasingly visible. Customer satisfaction ratings improved, with fewer complaints about rude staff. Media outlets that once hammered the airline for the viral incident now ran follow-up stories on its overhaul. Alyssa's own role, once unknown to the general public, was recognized more widely, especially after she graced the cover of a major business magazine under the headline, "The Woman Who Owns the Sky." The feature detailed her climb from modest beginnings to her controlling interest in the airline, focusing also on her moral stance. While the celebrity-level exposure felt disconcerting at times, Alyssa leveraged it to advocate for broader equity in the industry. On a personal level, she visited her mother, Monica, more frequently. They would share quiet evenings on the porch, sipping sweet tea. Monica would occasionally bring up her double shifts at the diner from years past, marveling at how life had changed. Alyssa assured her it was only the beginning. She had more to accomplish, more ceilings to break. Eventually, she found herself traveling once again through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, heading for a keynote in London. This time, her check-in was seamless. Another flight attendant recognized her name on the manifest and welcomed her politely. Passengers, too, offered nods of respect. She sensed an undercurrent of positivity, a subtle shift in tone that permeated the air. Staff members looked more at ease, as though they knew the company had their backs if they reported any wrongdoing. Sitting in the first-class lounge, Alyssa reflected on how a single toxic interaction had triggered a wave of transformation. Hard karma had taken down someone who believed she could treat passengers with scorn, but that karma also lifted Alyssa's mission to new heights. Now, more women and men of color were entering aviation, feeling encouraged to dream big, just like she once did as a child gazing at planes. The speaker system crackled, announcing final boarding for her flight. With a calm smile, Alyssa stood, collected her carry-on, and headed toward the gate. She walked with the confidence of someone who had faced adversity and turned it into a platform for global impact. Although Alyssa Davis might have begun this journey simply wanting a peaceful flight to New York, her clash with a prejudiced flight attendant sparked a transformative reckoning across the airline industry. By refusing to hide behind closed boardroom concessions, Alyssa demonstrated that real change demands both a spotlight and the relentless will to act. In the end, the flight attendant's downfall was not mere vengeance. It became a signal that racism and arrogance have no place in a world striving to unite all people through travel. Alyssa's reforms, from inclusive training to broader youth scholarships, proved that adversity can be a launchpad for sweeping progress. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the sting of injustice and the power of redemption, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's ensure more people hear Alyssa's message, stepping forward to reject bias and champion a future where dignity is guaranteed to every traveler.